In 399 BCE, a 70-year-old Athenian was put on trial for impiety and for corrupting the youth, convicted and speedily sentenced to death. The trial is especially shocking since the man in question was none other than Socrates, the philosopher who had spent his life wandering the streets of Athens, engaging in endless dialogues regarding the meaning of life. Why did the Athenians suddenly turn against this public teacher and judge him worthy of execution? The answer, most likely, is not the openly stated causes of the trial, but rather the connections that Socrates previously had to oligarchic leaders. In particular, Socrates had taught Critias, who became one of the 30 in 404 BCE. Fueled by their hatred of all enemies of democracy and anyone who had associated with the 30, the Athenians condemned Socrates to death. This trial shows how deeply the scars went in the collective psyche and how difficult it was for the Athenians to forget the terrible end of the Peloponnesian War. And while, as usual, more information survives about how the Athenians, more than any other polis, dealt with the aftermath of the war, it is clear that for the rest of the Greek world, their life in the 4th century BCE was very much the result of the Peloponnesian War. The early 4th century saw a power vacuum emerge in the Greek world for the first time since the early Archaic period. Defeated in the war, Athens was no longer an empire, while the winner, Sparta, had suffered a catastrophic decline in its population over the course of the Peloponnesian War. At the same time, Thebes had revamped its military, introducing the first two significant changes to the hoplite phalanx way of fighting since its inception: slightly longer spears and wedge formation. The final key to the Theban military supremacy was the Theban Sacred Band, formed in 378 BCE. An elite corps of 300 warriors, the band consisted of 150 couples, based on the assumption that the lovers would fight most bravely in order not to appear to be cowardly to their beloved. In 371 BCE, the Thebans demonstrated the success of their military reforms by defeating the Spartans at the Battle of Leuctra. They continued an aggressive program of military expansion over the next decade, a period known as the Theban hegemony. Sometime in the 360s BCE, a young Macedonian prince stayed for several years in Thebes as a hostage. Circa 364 BCE, the prince returned to Macedon and in 359 BCE descended to the throne as King Philip II. Up until that point in Greek history, the Macedonians had largely been known for two things: drinking their wine undiluted, which had marked them as complete and utter barbarians in the eyes of the rest of the Greeks, and being excellent horsemen. With Philip at the helm, this estimation was about to change. As soon as he came to the throne, Philip began transforming the Macedonian military into a more successful image of what he had seen at Thebes. Philip further lengthened the already longer spears used by the Thebans, creating the Macedonian sarissa, a spear of about 18 feet in length, double that of the traditional Greek hoplite spear. He retained the Theban wedge formation, but also added heavy cavalry to the line, thus incorporating the Macedonians' strongest element into the phalanx. The results spoke for themselves, as over the next 20 years, Philip systematically conquered all of mainland Greece, with the exception of Sparta, which he chose to leave alone. Philip's final great victory, which he shared with his teenage son Alexander, was at the Battle of Chaeronea, 338 BCE, in which the Macedonian armies defeated the combined forces of Athens and Thebes. Philip's conquest of the entire mainland was the end of an era, as for the first time the entire territory was united under the rule of a king. By all accounts, it appears that Philip was not going to stop at just conquering the Greek world. He did not, however, have this choice. In 336 BCE, while on his way to a theatrical performance, Philip was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards. His son, Alexander, then 20 years old, succeeded and continued his father's ambitious program of conquests. Alexander's first target was the Persian Empire, motivated in part by his love of Homer's Iliad and the perception among the Greeks that this new campaign was the continuation of the original mythical war against Asia. Moving farther and farther east in his campaigns, Alexander conquered the Balkans, Egypt, and the territories of modern-day Lebanon, Syria, and Israel before he achieved a decisive victory over Darius III at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE. Continuing moving eastwards, Alexander invaded India in 327 BCE, planning to conquer the known world and assuming that he was close to this achievement since the Greeks of his day were not aware of China's existence. His war-weary troops, however, rebelled in 326 BCE and demanded to return home. See Chapter 3. It appears that this mutiny was not the first that occurred in Alexander's army. Indeed, over the course of his rule, Alexander had also been the target of a number of failed assassinations. However, this mutiny forced Alexander to give in. Leaving several of his officers behind as satraps, a regional government, Alexander turned back. In 323 BCE, he and his army reached Babylon, the city that he had hoped to make the new capital of his world empire. There, Alexander fell ill and died at the ripe old age of 33. While Alexander's rule only lasted 13 years, his legacy reshaped Greece and the rest of ancient Eurasia for the next several centuries. A charismatic leader, albeit one prone to emotional outbursts, Alexander redefined what it meant to be king and general. His coinage reflects this reinvention. On one coin minted during his lifetime, for instance, appears Alexander dressed as the hero Heracles, while Zeus, whom Alexander alleged to be his real father, appears on the other side. In addition, by conquering territories that were previously not part of the Greek world, Alexander spread Greek culture farther than had anyone else before him. At the same time, by marrying several non-Greek princesses and encouraging such marriages by his troops, Alexander also encouraged the creation of a melting pot empire. He further cemented this creation by founding some 20 new cities named after himself all over his new empire, incorporating a cosmopolitan culture. In particular, Alexandria, the city that he founded in Egypt, became a center of Greek civilization, albeit with an Egyptian twist, and was seen as a new Athens well into the Roman Empire. Alexander's brief time in India produced a significant impact as well, as in 321 BCE, Chandragupta Maurya was able to unify India into a single kingdom for the first time, establishing the Mauryan Empire. See Chapter 3. Finally, in the Middle East, North Africa, and the Greek world, Alexander's generals divided his conquests into several kingdoms that they and their descendants continued to rule until the Romans conquered these respective areas. It appears that Alexander's melting pot empire, burning up as a phoenix upon his death, actually allowed several new empires and kingdoms to arise from its ashes.